Hello, my name is Alana and welcome to my YouTube channel. This YouTube channel, especially for the foreseeable future, will be, there's a hair poking me in my eyeball, will be just lots and lots of book reviews. And I said that in my previous video, the one right before this I reviewed. I don't know if I really call it a review. I just really kind of talked about Stephen Fry's Mythos and why I liked it. Not a traditional review at all, but lots of reviews because I just have this backlog of books that I have to review. So today is Swann's Way, and the next video after this will be Dracula, and lots more coming. So Virginia Woolf, some Elif Bottoman, some Nancy Mitford, and The Hobbit is coming. So yeah, I'm not going to belabor this because today's video, as you can tell by the title, I will be reviewing Volume 1 of Marcel Proust In Search of Lost Time, Swann's Way, this beast of a novel. I've already reviewed this on my Instagram, so my written review is already live on my blog and my Instagram, and those are linked down below. So I already have it written out. Getting to that process, or that final stage of getting the written review, was daunting. This is a book. How do you, not even just this particular book, but how does one really properly review Proust? I don't think you do. You just wing it and hope you throw it and hope it sticks. So this is my attempt to talk about Swann's Way. Let's dive into it. The cloud cover kind of got dark and cozy in here. I'm going to start with the quote. When a man is asleep, he has in a circle round him the chain of the hours, the sequence of the years, the order of the heavenly bodies. So this review, I'm going to briefly go over the plot. It's not a complicated plot, and then I'm just going to go into the themes that really stuck out to me, and then I'm going to kind of wrap it up by why do you even try to read something like this and what I gained from this, because ultimately reading this book alone made me a better reader. There are just certain books that you come across that just, it's a little crooked. There are certain books that you come across that just catapult you into a different type of reader, or they kind of mature you as a reader, I think is a better way to say it. I noticed, and I'm kind of, what is happening? Yeah, this is one of those books, and I'll get into this at the end, that after you read, just even if it's just Swann's Way and you haven't read the other 5 volumes yet, you almost, or at least I did, I almost immediately noticed how I had matured as a reader going into my next book. But we're going to say that to the end. Let's dive into this because I have a lot to get through. So yeah, I said this is a bit daunting to talk about, even to have a YouTube video about, because I mean, I am not a scholar. I am not I was not an English major. I did do a lot of writing in college, university, but I was a history sociology major. But I do love analysis, and I do feel, tooting my own horn a little bit, I do feel like I have a brain that just, I'm able to grasp concepts quickly. I'm able to grasp connections and patterns when I'm reading something, even in the world when I'm observing. That's just how my brain is wired. But this is a daunting piece of literature. It's considered some of the best literature of all time. So I did read this with a friend, and one of my Instagram friends named Julia. We buddy read a book every year, and this is what we decided to buddy read this year. And I do think that was very helpful because we were able to kind of ping pong some thoughts off of each other. So again, this is a piece of work total, because this is one of 6 volumes, that when you have finished reading Proust, you've read thousands of pages. A lot of people start Proust and they abandon it. They call it climbing Mount Proust. And some people, they fall off halfway or they don't get on at all. So maybe this won't be so much as a review. Again, it's just going to be my thoughts on the first volume. I do plan to read all of the volumes. I'm going to do one a year. But I think that the reader can get a lot out of Proust and finish it. You just have to have the right mindset. It's very doable, and I actually think it's more approachable than people give it credit for. This is a piece of literature that does require one to nibble rather than to take these massive chunks out of time. I do not think there is one proper way to read Proust. You kind of have to figure out how to read it for yourself. There are people who take a year to get through one volume. I can't do that. I lose interest. I have to go with the flow. But I actually do not. I don't care how big of a work. Look at this. Look at this crazy. I don't care how big of a work it is. 8 weeks max for me, because I'm getting the concepts and I got to keep moving because I'm going to get bored. My goal at the end of the year, I'm taking 2 weeks to, not 2 weeks, I wish. I'm taking 8 weeks to read War and Peace between November and December. But after that 8-week mark, I'm like, I'm done. I'm over it. I got to get this finished. It's just my brain. I can't linger for too long. I get bored. So again, there is no right way to read this. I saw one person say, take your time, explore everything, explore what is fascinating to you, but don't force it. Swann's Way. What exactly is this particular volume about? It does have a plot, though I could still one can argue that the plot is maybe rather loose or quite simple. We have an unnamed narrator, which, side note, the unnamed narrator is a thing in literature. You see it a lot. You have it in Grove by Esther Kinsey. You have unnamed narrator in Milkman. You have unnamed narrators in Rachel Cuss' Outline Trilogy. You do get her name, but you get her name at the very end. People get frustrated by the unnamed narrator because I think it's overdone. It's done right here. I don't mind it as long as it's done well, but I mean, people are hearkening back to these classic texts like this. So that's my sidebar. So again, we have an unnamed narrator that spends a significant amount of his time recounting his childhood, memories from Paris and Cambrai. We also have really the narrator recounting a character named Swann, Swann's Way, who is in love with a woman named Odette. And he spends a significant, if not the majority of this novel, talking about this relationship between Swann and Odette. And Swann has a daughter named Gilbert. I'm going to use the English pronunciation, Gilbert. It's spelled Gilerte. I cannot pronounce the French. I do not have the French pronunciation of her name. I tried before this video. I was listening to it and I tried and it was a disaster. We have this unnamed narrator talking about this relationship between Swann and Odette, and then we have the unnamed narrator who is in love with Swann's daughter Gilbert, and all of this is actually tied in together. So that is our very loose plot, if you will. While reading this novel, I can see how readers may get frustrated because the narrator goes into so much detail. At times it can be a bit stream of consciousness, if you will. And there's just so much detail around other things than this basic plot. There are so many descriptions that often are meandering. And like there's this whole passage that goes on for pages and the reader kind of goes on a detour and then he comes back to it about how it's the infamous maternal kiss that people kind of always talk about when they talk about this book in particular. He just wants his mother to come up and kiss him goodnight, and it goes on and on and on. Then he detours, then it goes on again. And we get family gatherings and we get some of his commentary about some of the servants that are working for the family. We get descriptions on scenery and pieces of art and flowers, vegetables, food, cathedrals. There is a point where he's describing cathedrals and other buildings. But really, all of these detours are really hearkening back to the central themes. You just have to do a little bit of legwork to read between the lines, because they will all kind of harken back to Swann, Odette, and Gilbert in the narrator. So again, like I said, I buddy read this with my friend Julia, and these are the themes that we decided to hone in on that stuck out to us the most. So we decided to hone in on the concept of memory, the distortion of reality, love, and obsession in love. So again, Swann's Way spends a significant amount of time discussing memory, how memories are shaped, how we memorialize others, and how our memories are often shaped by perception rather than reality. And here's a quote: "Remembering again all the places and people I had known, what I had actually seen of them, and what others had told me." Julie and I were blatantly reminded, and we both highlighted that quote. We were chatting in our DMs on Instagram, and we had both highlighted that quote when we were kind of doing a checkup on how the other was doing with the text. And last year we read a book called A Legacy by Sybil Bedford. And it's not a book that you really hear a lot of people talk about. New York Review Books has published it. So I say check it out. It's definitely a worthwhile read. I'm not going to go into what that book is about, but in essence, that book also has a narrator who is named. Basically, she's saying the same thing. Our memories are formed, but other people are telling us. And who has the authority and the ability to tell those stories? That's the story that gets remembered. So that's pretty much what she was saying. And so I always love it when a read ties into another read unexpectedly. So again, this narrator is pretty much saying the same thing. It's discussing how our memories are really just a compilation of other people making impressions on us with their own recollections. This is what Sybil Bedford had to say in her novel, A Legacy. "What I learned came to me, like everything else in this story, at second, third hand, in chunks and puzzles, degrees and flashes, by hearsay and tale-bearing, and being told by one or two descriptions that meant everything to those who gave them." Oh, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to keep going because here is a quote from Swann's Way. "Even in the most insignificant details of our daily life, none of us can be said to constitute a material whole, which is identical for everyone, and need only be turned up like a page in an account book or the record of a will. Our social personality is a creation of the thoughts of other people." Man, that's good stuff. Ooh, my little brain is tingling. I really want to say tingling. That's a weird phrase. My brain is tingling. There is so much to unpack there. Ooh, and then you can really get into how memory is subjective because it's all based on who's telling you, how they remembered it, that person. And our memory is fallible. How people take out certain details so that certain memories are more favorable or the outcome makes them look better, etc. So much to unpack there. Because we know how the saying goes. There's side A, there's side B, and then there's the truth. All right, I'm not going to belabor that because I could go on about that for a decade. I'm going to segue into how both our narrator and Swann place Gilbert and Odette on pedestals and how this distorts how they view them. And I'm not saying that the narrator and Swann are definitely flawed characters, especially Swann, because there are 5 other volumes for us to kind of get on with the narrator, but Swann especially is quite flawed, but they are seeing these women through rose-colored glasses, and they are completely willing to overlook their shortcomings and enhance in their memories the idealized versions of who they want them to be. And here's a quote: "We try to discover in things which become precious to us on that account the reflection of what our soul has projected onto them. We are disillusioned when we find that they are in reality devoid of the charm which they owed in our minds to the association of certain ideas." And again, all of this is harkening back to what we choose to dwell on when it comes to people, what we choose to ignore when it comes to people. And over time, it's creating this impression that is not realistic of people. Through this, again, one theme that Julie and I talked about is love and obsession within love. And so this segues nicely because in Swann's Way, our narrator spends a lot of time discussing how love and obsession are really married. And you can't really talk about one without talking about the other. From their perspective, and really from Proust's perspective, and what he's really getting at here is one is so infatuated by this idealized person that one has created in their mind. It also, in a sense, makes us selfish beings because we We want the object of our love, that person, to conform with our whims and desires because we're projecting on them our idealized versions of them, often without this person being aware of it. And that's often where you get this tension of this person isn't who I want them to be. That's because we're projecting on them and we're not communicating to them what we're expecting out of a relationship, correct? And that's where a lot of tension can be created. Again, it constructs a bit of a tension between the person that we've fabricated in our minds and the person that's actually being presented in front of us. And here's a quote. All that was needed was that our predilection should become exclusive. And that condition is fulfilled when, in this moment of deprivation, the quest for the pleasures we enjoyed in his or her company is suddenly replaced by an anxious, torturing need, whose object is the person alone. An absurd, irrational need, which the laws of this world make it impossible to satisfy and difficult to assuage. The insensate, agonizing need to possess exclusively. The way that the narrator idealizes Gilbert parallels the way Swann idealizes Odette. They both become a bit obsessive, and it distorts who Gilbert and Odette are as characters and how they treat this man. Also, side note, we get a little bit of, it's literally like in one or two sentences, we get a little bit of Odette's background, and you can tell it's like, whoa, she probably had a traumatic childhood. I would love to get a spinoff of Odette's background. That would be good stuff. But yeah, and again, another quote, because I like my quotes. I consider them receipts backing up what I'm saying. All the time I was away from Gilbert, I felt the need to see her, because constantly trying to picture in my mind, I ended up being unable to do so, and by no longer knowing precisely what my love represented. Besides, she had never told me that she loved me. While reading Swann's Way, I couldn't help but notice how frequently Proust writes about flowers and why he may have done this. I mean, it is everywhere. I mean, the homeboy could just like flowers, okay? But I do have a hypothesis, and Julia was like, oh, you might be onto something, so I'm just going to share. In a way, flowers, especially the head of the flower, they have quite a short lifespan compared to the actual stem or bush or plant itself, right? You can have a flower or a bush or plant that blossoms every year, but the flowers themselves don't last very long. And again, this is a book in which Proust is really talking about memories, and there's a lot of recollection going on, how fleeting those memories are, but how we do kind of tend to hold on to certain memories and how they just kind of stay imprinted on our minds. And so the connection that I drew was flowers are fleeting, just like our memories and our thoughts. Yet there is something about them that lingers in our memories. There's something still about flowers that lingers in our memories. I mean, think about it. Their scent, their color. You can detect the scent of a rose right now. Like, think of a rose. What does it smell like? You're going to be able to remember it and recall to your mind what it looks like. Let's say you were given a bouquet of flowers once and it was beautiful, and it's probably long dead, but you know exactly what it looked like. You can remember the exact space and time in which it was given to you and how long it lasted. So there is an impression there, and that's just kind of what I gathered. It's just this marrying of memory. Yes, it's fleeting, but there is something there that lingers, even if it can be difficult to sometimes grasp, or maybe it's a little bit vague. Maybe I'm reaching. Let me know what you think. But that's just kind of what came to my mind. We're actually wrapping up here. This is not going to be anywhere near as long as my Outlander review. The last few minutes of this video, I'm going to kind of say why I think, if you're interested in venturing into In Search of Lost Time, why it's worth your time. No pun intended. I mean, why read a 6-volume work that when you're done, you've spent hours upon hours upon hours and read thousands of pages? Why put yourself, Why put yourself through this? Well, For starters, this is one massive piece of very well-written literature. If you are a person who likes to read for the sake of the words and you don't mind the plot being heavy or intense, but you love good language, even for a translated work, this is just beautiful writing. It feels a little bit like lucid dreaming, the way that the narrator is seamlessly shifting between memories and thoughts and things happening and going from point A to point D and circling back to B. It's done so well. It feels like lucid dreaming. And it's actually not as difficult to keep up with as you would think. Proust's writing, I would argue, definitely has a bit of a cadence to it. That's the only way I can describe it. Once you get into the groove of that cadence and the rhythm in which he writes, the pages will flow. However, there are some pages or some passages where you read them and you have to stop and ponder and think, read it again. You may have to go back to a previous annotation or a note that you made and reread that passage because it's actually hearkening back to something he's already mentioned. You're like, oh wait, why is he constantly talking about the sky? Oh, I noticed that there's a trend here. So there are times when he will stop you and slow you down and merely make you think. There are other times where you just sit and before you know it, 20, 30, 40 pages have gone by and it didn't feel like you spent that much time sitting there reading 40 pages, right? So Proust will dictate the speed in which you read him, and the speed will vary throughout this work, but that is enjoyable if you have the patience for it. I think that's the point. This is a piece of work that has to be dissected, and you're not going to get everything at once. In one sitting or in one read. That it's impossible. It's impossible to really get everything that an author is alluding to in one read. Some of them are more difficult than others. But what you do grasp it, revel in it, and then, don't stress out about not getting everything. The way that I read this, again, like I said, I would read something, it reminded me of something, and I had to go back and reread other passages. Sometimes I would sit down, it would take me 30 minutes to read 5 pages because I was rereading a passage or rereading a paragraph and going over it and over it and over it until it clicked. So it's actually quite possible that by the time you finish reading this book, you've read it twice. I think that's a good thing. And I'm going to tell you why, because I kind of said this in the beginning, why this made me a more mature reader. Everybody is going to get something different from Proust. It's full of symbols. It's full of imagery. And because no two people ever read the same book, as the famous quote goes, what you get from it may not be what I get from it. You may read it and get something completely different because the way that it's written, it's one of those books that holds up a mirror to the reader. How you think about life, how you perceive life, how you think about music, how you think about relationships, love, and childhood, etc. That is the mirror that image that's going to be reflected back to you. That's what you're going to get from it. Because you're going to recall the own times in your life, youthful nostalgic memories on family trips, or that person that you had a crush on when you were in elementary school, infatuation, that one time you had a really good meal on Thanksgiving when you were 10 years old. I mean, this is going to be so unique to each reader. But because Proust is a writer that does force the reader to read between a lot of lines, he matures you as a reader. And what I mean by that is there are certain books that I have read in my life. I'm not even old. There are certain books that I have read that after I finish reading the book and I go to my next read after that, all of a sudden I'm a quicker reader. I'm quicker at grasping themes. I can read at a slightly faster pace, but my comprehension is still quite quick. This was one of those books because he pushes you outside of your comfort zone. The Brothers Karamazov is one of those because there are times when this book is quite dense when certain things that he's alluding to. It's a little elusive. He's being cryptic. He's evading a little bit. So you have to stop and read and think, ponder, read it again, go back to it, flip back 20 pages and try to connect some dots. But when and it takes work, but when you will notice, I noticed, please let me know if I'm not the only person who this happened to. When I picked up The Idiot after this by Leif Bodeman. I did. There is a lot of symbolism in that book as well. I cannot wait to read that. That book surprised me a lot. Ooh, I enjoyed that book a lot. Ooh, it was a treat. But I was able to grasp things faster and at a deeper level because I had read Proust, and my brain had he fine-tuned my analytical skills. Again, I'm also, as of this video, I have about maybe 80 pages left of To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. And Virginia Woolf packs so much imagery and symbolism into her novels. And I am flying through To the Lighthouse because, again, Proust put me over the precipice again. It was just one of those books. I read it and I was like, man, he sharpened my brain. It felt like I had just taken a college course and I'm picking up on stuff left and right. So I think that is a reason to read Proust in and of itself. Aside from the gorgeous language, aside from, it's just relatable. He writes about things you're like, man, that is how you articulate what it feels like to listen to a piece of beautiful music. That's what insomnia feels like. He really just hits the nail on the head when it comes to everyday things that we experience, but also because it's a challenge to read and he pushes you outside of your comfort zone, he matures you as a reader if you have the patience and the will to do it. I did accompany this book with, I have it on my tabletop. It's called, in the living room, it's called Paintings in Proust. And Proust alludes to a lot of paintings in his work, in the whole series, In Search of Lost Time. And so this book goes through all of the pieces of art that he mentions. And so you're able to kind of visualize and draw connections that way. So if you want to become a better analytical reader, I say it is worth the effort. I also think this would be really, really great as an audiobook, just because of the way that it flows. Like I said, it's a bit like lucid dreaming. It's a bit stream of consciousness at times. I could imagine this to be extremely pleasant to listen to. Whenever I decide to reread In Search of Lost Time after I finish reading it in the first place, I think the next time I try to tackle In Search of Lost Time, I'm going to use an audiobook. I think that's the deal. So anyway, let's wrap this up. That is what Julie and I gathered and absorbed, if you will, from the first volume of In Search of Lost Time, Swann's Way. And I know that there's a ton of stuff I missed, but again, I don't stress out about not catching everything in one go. I just focus on what I am able to pick up on and I run with it. It's impossible to get everything and I don't try, but it was an extremely enjoyable read. It was way more approachable than I thought it would be, especially because, again, I knew this wasn't something I was going to rush through. I mean, this is not something that you pick up and read in a week. I do look forward to reading volume 2 next year within a budding grove. And that's how I'm going to approach Proust, just once a year, because when you're done, you're like, ooh, that was a lot. that was mental gymnastics. But it feels like you've just, that you did something. You know what I mean? You know those books that when you finish reading them, you're like, ooh, I did that. Check that off the list. Yes. Kind of like how I'm going to feel when I read War and Peace, because it's just so big. But yeah, so I am going to give Proust some breathing room. I'm not going to touch him again until next year. But I do know that this is going to be a text that I will just go back to and read certain passages because they're just beautiful. And there is just certain things he just hits the nail on the head. And as always, I enjoy reading with my friend Julia. We have very similar taste in books, and I think that we pick up on similar things in books. So I would recommend buddy reading it if you want to tackle this, because this is an excellent book a really series of books. It's really one book, but you know what I mean. To bounce ideas back off of a person and vice versa, because there's a lot going on. I rated this a 4 out of 5. Some people, it's their favorite book of all time. They love Proust so much. I mean, 4 to 5 is pretty high for me. Did it, again, to each their own. I really, really enjoyed it. It was very enjoyable, but not a favorite. It is what it is. I'm going to wrap this up. All of my links down below. Please let me know if you've read Swann's Way, if you've gone beyond Swann's Way, if you've read the entirety of In Search of Lost Time, how you're getting on with it, how you got onto it. What did you pick up on in this book? Because like I said, this is a book that is like a mirror. It's going to hold up something for the reader, and whatever is reflected back at you is often really just based on how you interact and engage with the world. So yes, I'm going to wrap it up. Please like, subscribe, leave me a comment, and I will see you guys in the next review.